Delighted that all of you are here on this conference on a very topical subject, the future of the digital economy, cross-currents in emerging regimes. We are delighted to be collaborating with Data Catalyst Institute. They come with global experience in facilitating this conference across different countries and different stakeholders. And we are very happy to have Jake and Peter here collaborating with ICRIER on this. Thank you. So may I now request our Director and Chief Executive, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, to share his opening remarks.
Secretary Aruna Sundararajan from the Department of Telecom, Peter, Cherukuri from, as Gangesh said, from Data Catalyst, the Executive Director. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished, all of you, I think, recognize so many of you, and all of you are distinguished in your own fields. It's such a delight to see such a wonderful audience for a topic that, as Gangesh said, has become so important in the global economy. And this topic here, the conference that we are organizing, is hopefully a prelude to a lot of things that we intend to do in collaboration with Data Catalyst. So thanks to Jake and Peter for partnering with ICRIER in this effort and bringing in what we feel would be the global experience. And we'll be able to sort of not only look at the Indian experience, but the emerging markets experience, to look at what is the best way forward in this very critical area of global sort of wealth, or as would you want to call the new oil, or would you want to call it the new gold, whatever you want to call it, or you could even call it the new toxic, whatever you want to call it. But I think there needs to be a discourse on this topic, and we are delighted that we are at the cutting edge, at the frontier of this important topic. I won't take too much time, but I did want to sort of present a framework where I especially see this data in India, data is the new whatever, in India, and how we might be able to take sort of meaningful and constructive steps forward. There is no denying the fact that we've seen a revolution in telecommunications, and now the voice revolution has happened. Now we are seeing a data revolution. But let me just step back a little bit, and those of you who are of demographics that I belong to in the 60s, 70s, well, not the 60s, sorry, at least the 70s, and there you recognize the problems of information, the problems of service delivery that we went through during our sort of college days or school days. And you see the position now, it's so vastly different. And there's no gainsaying the fact that what economists call market failure has been alleviated by first the mobile, then sort of data on mobile or data on computers or data on handhelds. That fact is here to stay. And I can give you endless examples about how this has happened, whether it is the farmers who've got information on phones to be able to exercise their options of better prices, whether it is people who want to take rides, book hotels, where demand and supply comes together so efficiently and so quickly. I mean, it's unimaginable that this would have happened without the telecom revolution or without what we are now seeing, I think, the beginnings of data revolution in India. Of course, the data revolution, now there are sort of several anecdotal sort of pieces of evidence which suggest that we are creating more data in a week than we created in the last millennia. Can you imagine? In 1 week, we are creating. Now, obviously, not all of that data is going to be used, but the fact that we are creating it has the possibility of both sort of using it constructively, positively for enhancing welfare, or also there are definitely abuses of that data, and there we witnessed a lot of abuses of that data. But I mean, that's not the point that we want to sort of focus on here. We want to see what is the best way that we can take this revolution forward and use it constructively for both our economies, for emerging markets, and for the rest of the world. You know, as a student, I remember when I was in the US and we wanted to, you know, go to, let's say, New York from Washington, and I used to put up posters on a notice board and say, little stick notes that I want to go to New York, anybody willing to take me there, I'll pay for the fuel. And several others would put up, and then demand and supply would sort of meet. But it wasn't a very efficient way of getting, you know, demand and supply to meet and thereby create those markets to work more efficiently. And this is an example, of course, you know what I'm talking about, Obert and Ula, and there are, you know, in the hotel industry, there are several examples of this. In the retail industry, again, several examples of this. But these are common examples. There is one example which I was thinking that some of you may know, some of you may not know, which I thought I would emphasize, and this, you know, comes back to my training as a microeconomist in markets and competition. And I remember when, you know, grocery stores in the United States were stocking a lot of, you know, they stock a lot of things. The RFID technology had just come into existence there. And so scanning of, you know, prices, the inventories became much more efficient. And you know what happened subsequently? Because we didn't know this, but as more and more data became available because of the RFID technology, and became available and was accessible, a lot of competition economists, and in fact even lawyers, began to assess the competitive impacts of grocery store pricing, or what has popularly come to be called as resale price maintenance in the US. And then they determined that, in fact, there was a lot of abuse of market power in the selling of grocery items, typically, you know, ready-to-eat breakfast cereals and so on and so forth. But the fact that we were able to capture that abuse in the market, and lawyers and economists were able to determine that, was based on the fact that now this data was available, and that the information asymmetries were beginning to be reduced as a result of this technology. And you multiply this, you know, zillion times over today, and you know what world we are living in, because there are possibility improvements, not only on the consumer side, but there are vast improvements that are possible on the producer side. So the point I'm making is that because of this technology, because of handheld devices are with you, always on you, maybe not such a good thing, but they're always with you, has the sort of creates the possibilities, has the potential to both enhance producer welfare and enhance consumer welfare, and therefore also impact the efficiency of markets and improve the functioning of economies. Now, if we ended there, it would be a great thing, right? I mean, obviously, it's not what economists call just a Pareto sort of improvement that is happening in the economy. When you have something good that is happening, of course, there are going to be trade-offs. Of course, there are going to be, you know, impacts that of the data economy, which will lend itself to abusing of the system. And then there are several examples that we have, you know, come up with. One, of course, the most common and popular is the fact that you know, websites and portals can do customized sort of advertising and customized and targeted pricing. Now, I don't know whether targeted pricing could be classified as an abuse, and I'll defer to the lawyers in the audience whether it's an abuse. Imagine yourself as, you know, one imagine you're sitting in a class and your professor telling you that if your willingness to pay for a particular item, let's say you walk into a store and you have your willingness to pay displayed on your head, then the store or the good will be priced at your willingness to pay, which, if you were an economist, you were, classify this as first-degree price discrimination. And I don't know whether it may or may not be possible in the future where, your willingness to pay will somehow be displayed on your forehead or displayed. It's possible. I mean, given the things that are happening with technology, it could very well be possible. But suppose it were possible, then you would have, just like an auction result, you'll give it to somebody exactly on the willingness to pay. Now, you can't be selling, common items of purchase at people's willingness to pay, but technology is making that possible. Now, whether that is good or bad, or whether that is anti-consumer, remains to be seen. I mean, there is price discrimination of the third-degree kind that you see with, peak load pricing, the sort of pricing that taxi applications are doing today. That is an example of what is the third-degree price discrimination. That is happening. But charging customized and targeted prices to every individual is something which probably will not be kosher to competition authorities across the world, but that is what begins to be possible. And then you take it to the extreme situation where, I don't know if you've heard of CookieBot, which just came out with results of its analysis in the European Union 2 days ago, which suggests that hundreds of websites in the European Union are collecting data of visitors and tourists within the European Union, profiling them with a potential for commercial sales. And commercial sales of profile data of individuals would be fairly high, and they would be sort of people who are willing to pay for that because it lends itself to a lot of commercial value. So those are the kinds of things that we need to be worried about, apart from being worried about what is true, what is accurate, how can you distinguish between fact and fiction, because in the technology world, in the world of social media, there's a thin line between what is accurate and what is not. So as I said, there are positives, and as an economist, I would like to we as a team in ICRIER would like to focus on the positive, but as I said, there is no denying the fact that there are so many negatives of this explosion in the data economy. For example, I know, jocularly people mention that the Google can track you in a grocery store, whether you bought an item off the top shelf or the bottom shelf, and when did you buy it off the top shelf, and when did you buy it off the bottom shelf, how were your knees doing when you were buying it off the top shelf, were you not able to bend down, etc. It's, all those sorts of things which makes you wonder whether this is something that should be allowed, or whether this is something that should be stopped, and if it is to be stopped, how on earth are we going to begin to regulate and institutionalize this? Of course, GDPR has made a beginning, and I think there's going to be massive cross-border spillovers as a result of that. But I wanted to pose, and there will be a whole technical sessions that we have arranged for the next couple of hours till 4:30 in the evening, and we will focus on various aspects of the digital economy. But I wanted to leave the audience and everybody else, people who are thinking about this, with a sort of analogy. I mean, data the new oil, data the new gold, or data the new natural resource asset, or whether it should belong to the country or not. I'm not going to focus on that, but I wanted to, it's a resource, it's an asset. And an analogy will help. Maybe it's not the right analogy, maybe the metaphor is completely misplaced, but I'm just coming from a climate meeting in Beijing, and as you know, China is very strongly trying to combat climate change, air pollution, so on. So I thought I'll try and provide a metaphor or an analogy from that lens and see whether it fits or not. A lot of the time we were told in India and in the rest of the world, and rightly for the right reasons, that climate and economic growth are conflict. They conflict with each other. And they can't go. I mean, if you take climate action, you're going to compromise economic growth, you're going to compromise the welfare of people, financial inclusion, and so on. I think there's new evidence that is coming up, technology, renewables, solar, wind, etc., all of that that is coming up to suggest that no, it may not actually be that climate goals and your growth goals may actually go together. It's not, in fact, a two-horse race. And if you look at that analogy with data and the economy, it might be a helpful way to begin a conversation. A lot of people think that if you take strong action on data protection and privacy, etc., it will begin to compromise economic growth. And perhaps it will. I don't know. This is just an analogy. I think it's a good way of thinking about how to approach the new growing data economy. We can design, just like we've been able to design growth in a sustainable manner, can we design data protection and privacy such that it doesn't hit the innovation, the growth, the flows that provide so much of consumer and producer welfare that we know since the beginning of the mobile revolution that this has happened in countries across the world. So I think that's maybe it's misplaced, maybe we can't do it, maybe we can, but I thought it might be a constructive way to begin to look at the topic. Maybe, it's not such a bad thing to have protection. Of course, we need privacy to have protection, but do it in a manner that doesn't hit the economic goals of the country, both locally and globally. And then when you begin to talk about it globally, it could be a public good, could be a quasi-public good, could be a private good. All those discussions could begin to happen. I think that could be one way we could sort of begin to look at the data economy. But of course, there's long ways to go, and as I said, I'm absolutely delighted that ICRIER is beginning to work on this topic, and delighted that Peter and Jake and Data Catalyst are going to be collaborating with us. And I think this will be a rich area, not only for research, but also for creating a public discourse with audiences such as yourselves. So thank you all for coming, and especially delighted that Secretary is here. And she's the architect of the new telecom policy, the NDPC, 2018 National Digital Communications Policy, which has just been sort of put out by the government, and hopefully there will be some traction on it soon enough. And that sort of provides the framework of where we are going to go with not only the data economy, but with the telecom economy in general. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. Thank you all very much. May I now request Peter for his opening remarks.
Good morning. Morning. Wow, that's a good response. One more time. Good morning. Oh, that's great. That's even better. I'll be brief so we can get to the wonderful remarks of Madam Secretary, but just want to say first thank you, Rajat and ICRIER staff and Madam Secretary and other honorable guests for having us here. My name is Peter Cherukuri. I am the Executive Director of Data Catalyst. On behalf of myself and our co-founder, Jake Ward, and our board member, Jake Ward. Jake, can you stand up and just mention your name a couple times? This is Jake. We are very excited to partner with ICRIER and to bring this event to you. In fact, our goal today's event is not to be an isolated engagement. A lot of these events, once they take place, then it becomes a tree of forest. We want this to be a start of a larger engagement with ICRIER and in the conversation of an important dialogue on the future of data protection, regulation in India and around the world. In the coming months, this relationship will produce a body of work that I think will illuminate a lot of the things that are happening here in India, but connect the dots to other areas in this world. But I want to share with you, because a lot of you may not know what Data Catalyst is and why are we even here. We started Data Catalyst Institute because we saw a disconnect between the policies that govern and the way that data drives economic growth, similar to what Rajat said, and how data is a service to the public. So we wanted to help wherever we could. So we started in Chile. We helped policymakers understand how their decisions around data policy were having unintended consequences on small businesses. In Europe, we demonstrated to the administration through economic research on how data flows in a post-GDPR world were affecting innovation and startup investments. We actually demonstrated that after GDPR was put in effect, there was a decline in investments within the startup community. So it has a direct correlation to the relationship that data regulation and innovation might have. In the US, we are actively involved in the myriad of data regulation activity at the state and federal level. However, here in India, something unique is happening. Many of the elements of data regulation that the rest of the world is just beginning to grapple with, India has already considered and is far advanced in its thinking and a dialogue. The responsibility in this room is far greater because you've assumed the mantle of leadership. You've considered not only how data should be governed through tech innovation, but also through moral leadership. You appreciate that the decisions you make around data regulation may reset the conditions of the social contract with your citizens and have a profound impact for India's long-term success. As we will hear today, there are questions about data localization, encryption, and security, and questions around fundamental rights regarding data privacy. Data Catalyst Institute is here to help, and we participate in that conversation any way possible. We are at our core an advocate for good process and better policy. As I said in the beginning, we're going to sort of begin work this is the beginning of our work in India, and we believe will illuminate the global dialogue of data regulation. Our ICRIER relationship will produce a series of white papers, including a look at shared accountability, examining responsibility of developers, platforms, and users. If any of you have areas that you would like to explore, come talk to us. Come find us. Jake and I will be here today. But we look forward to hear from everybody, so let's get started. Rajat, you want to introduce our speaker? Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. May I now request Ms. Aruna Sundararajan for her chief guest keynote address.
Rajat, Peter, distinguished invitees. At the outset, I must say that I wonder what I can say that this audience already does not know, because I think most of the people here are people who have done deep work on the digital sector in some way or the other. And many of them are thought leaders in their own right. So I had to wrestle with this question, listening to Rajat's opening remarks, whether it was meant to be a kind of philosophical question, what is the future of the digital economy, or what is the future of the digital economy here and now, because like every other country, India too is actively engaged in negotiating its way through very complex dilemmas that this digital economy is throwing up. And many of them, while being intensely emergent issues, they are also philosophical issues because they affect different sets of people in different ways. So I thought that, taking my cue from Rajat, I will speak a little about the larger issues that digital is throwing up, but also about what the practical issues that we are confronted with, whether we are policymakers, whether we are think tanks, whether we are NGOs working in this space, whether we are other stakeholders. So a couple of things by way of initial remarks. Certainly, India is digitizing at a rapid rate, much more rapidly than many of the countries that we know. They have had a much longer transition period. But in India, in the last 2-3 years, I think the rate at which we are digitizing has been quite unprecedented. So it's both that the digital footprint is expanding and reaching new areas, but it is also going down deeper and impacting different verticals also more intensely at the same point in time. The second important point to note is that India probably has more at stake in the digital future than many other countries around the world. And this is, I think, for 2 or 3 reasons. If you were to speak about it qualitatively, it would be because we have such a deficit of conventional infrastructure that digital infrastructure for us becomes key. The second, culturally, we adapt digital technologies. There is a real appetite for digital technologies in this country more than many others. Possibly also because we have a much younger demography. But not just younger demography, even if you look at older farmers who live in rural areas, and typically you would expect some kind of technology resistance. In India, you'll be surprised. Technology is something that they adapt to with a great deal of enthusiasm. And if I were to speak not qualitatively, but in terms of actual studies that have been done, I could do no better than to point to the ICRIER study, which showed that in India, a 10% increase in internet usage has really made significant change. And they say that in 2010, when they did this survey, basically the incremental GDP on account of a 10% increase in internet usage was something like 1.08%. But in 2016, that increased to 2.4%. And the latest study is that this is as high as 3.2%. That means that 3.2% of incremental state GDP has been driven by a 10% increase in internet usage. So this affirms the intuition that in India, digital is extremely critical, both for growth as well as for delivering the development services that we look at. So whether we look at it from the prism of pure economic growth or from a larger developmental perspective of trying to deliver services to people, on both counts, it appears that we definitely have a huge stake in digital, and that is why we need to get our digital policies right. What are the digital drivers that we are seeing in India that is accounting for this almost frenetic pace of digitization? I think firstly, certainly government policies, demonetization being one example. If you look at what it did to financialization, digitization of the financial sector as a case in point, we saw that in the last 2 years, the banking and financial applications have grown hugely. It's not even double-digit growth, it's almost triple-digit growth that we have seen in the manner in which these sectors have got digitized. But again, if you look at direct benefits transfer, 200, 300 million people getting benefits digitally, that is something that's absolutely unprecedented and huge. So apart from government policies or initiatives, if you look at the rate at which digital infrastructure has grown in the country, and we know that in the last 2 years, we have seen the biggest ever increase in the telecom connectivity infrastructure. You know, people have rapidly upgraded from 2G to 3G and now from 3G to 4G. And even as we speak, this sector, which has incidentally been one of the highest recipients of FDI over the last decade or so, still continues to be attracting strong investments. And you know, while this has been spurred by hyper competition on one hand, it's certainly good news for the consumer, because we expect that the rate at which internet penetration in the country, the rate at which mobile 4G is going to reach this country, and possibly, hopefully, even 5G, all these are being significantly accelerated, you know, with the kind of consolidation that we have seen in the telecom sector in recent years. So the digital infrastructure growth is certainly one strong driver of digitization. I already mentioned about digital services, including banking. The social media, the explosion of social media in India, the fact that India has now overtaken the US on some platforms, and the rate at which the vernacular segments are adopting social media. In fact, I think this is something that is absolutely phenomenal and is changing the way in which people consume media, consume you know, political, social, entertainment content. And of course, we know that e-commerce is also an area which has been seeing a lot of expansion and growth in the last few months. Therefore, how India generates data, how it consumes data, how it protects data, how it transfers data, how it harnesses the data, and how it protects and secures this data, this is going to become of paramount importance in shaping the overall future of Indians. I think it's possibly fair to say that given the kind of stakes that India has in digital, and given the fact that digital has delivered so many benefits for India, I think in many other countries, people would be a little more ambivalent about what digital has delivered, because they've had other conventional media and have been able to consume services even in the absence of digital. But I think for India, it's, you know, one feels much less ambivalent when you affirm that digital has been a great democratizer for India. It has been a great leveler. It has delivered cutting-edge platforms and services. It has opened up huge windows for people. And my own, I think the most striking thing for me is that, you know, the way it has done away with hierarchies for millions of Indians. Now, whether it is accessing you know, Google Pays or Paytm or anything, it is totally different from the way you would access a service, or you used to access a service if you went to a bank. And I know this because it was not so far ago, I think about 10 years ago, when people have waited 7 to 10 years to open a bank account. And you know, I work with a lot of women. I used to work in a large women's organization in Kerala. And there, one of the big, it was a big, you know, a very large organization of 3.3 million women, comprised solely of, you know, federations of women from different areas. So kind of large cooperative. And one of the biggest issues they faced was that they just had no access to their bank. And they would say that they would have to go and hang around in the bank branch, hoping to catch the bank manager's eye, because he would wait till he finished with all his customers, by which time it would be, you know, late, in the afternoon, and only then he would turn to these women. This is just one instance, but for me it's a very striking instance because, these were extremely painful experiences for people to go through. And the fact that they can now access the banking sector with a phone where they're virtually anonymous. I think, so certainly for India, digital and digital platforms have delivered huge benefits. However, having said that, I think we are at a point in time where digital is throwing up as many challenges as it is offering solutions. And I don't think there are easy answers to many of the questions and challenges that digital is throwing up. But just to give you a sense of where we are in terms of, what kind of digital policies should this country have. This is, as Peter was observing, I think in the last 2 years, we have seen a lot of, government policies being made in this area. On infrastructure, we've had the National Digital Communications Policy. We've had the National Electronics Policy, which is going to affect, the manufacturing of hardware and devices in the digital sector. We have had a cloud policy. Around data, we've had the Sri Krishna Committee come up with its draft on data protection. We've had the TRI come out with its recommendations on net neutrality, which the Telecom Department has accepted. We had a first version of a new e-commerce policy that has undergone some tweaks in recent weeks. So as we speak, there is a lot of work and activity going on in terms of putting together, data policies across different domains. I think this work has just started, and although Peter did say that we are, fairly advanced, I would believe that there is, a lot of work ahead. So, data in the health sector, how is that going to be regulated? Data affecting the transport sector, how is that going to be regulated? So I think there are going to be many more areas in which we will have to look at data very carefully. But while some of them are sectoral data policies and may or may not impact the larger data regimes, some policies are going to be fundamental. So data localization, data protection, how the e-commerce, I think these are all going to be fundamental policies which will determine which way or what is the kind of digital economy that we are going to have. So I think if we look at where the world is going, one is that in the last year we have seen the GDPR come up. We have seen a number of countries question Facebook, fine Google. We have seen across Europe, we have seen the US come up with the new Cloud Act. We expect that on data protection, the US also will perhaps come up with new regulation. So I think across the world, we are seeing regulation emerge. And some of them are a little, like the GDPR, for example, looks at a more human rights-centered approach. In the US, as we all know, in the past, the policies have been more of a hands-off approach where they have let industry drive the agenda. But that might change given the fact that so much these digital platforms are beginning to influence and penetrate our lives so deeply. So what is interesting is that whether it is the US, which has a kind of absolutely open kind of regulatory regime, or China, which has a completely different regulatory regime, the point is that in both, privacy is not getting the best protection. So I think we will perhaps have to look at the rest of the world, because a policy like the US, for the US it is all right, because the US in any case is where all these large technology platforms are domiciled. And they also have very strong law enforcement agencies and laws, which will perhaps give them the kind of control and influence that they need. And China, of course, since it has developed its own digital ecosystem, which is quite firewalled from the rest, it doesn't have that kind of problem. But India, along with Europe, with Latin America, I think we will have to look at what set of what kind of regulatory regimes really suit us best. It is not necessary that these India's stances have to be confrontational. I think India's way traditionally has to be to look at more collaborative kind of approaches, especially because we also have an opportunity to work with a lot of these platforms. Maybe we can build our own version of the India stack on some of these platforms, whether it is IoT or health. For example, it's interesting that in education, the startup Byju's has emerged as one of the world's most promising startups in this area. So, we've taken digital technologies, applied it to a challenge which is uniquely Indian. How do you reach education to millions of people, given that the quality of average education is not what we want it to be? So I do foresee that in health, in education, in agriculture, there are untapped, unharnessed opportunities where Indian capabilities could partner with global capabilities and bring completely new kinds of services. So for that, I think it is important that India will have to keep its borders open, but at the same time, we will need to invest deeply in local capabilities, because without that, it will mean that we will not be able to get the full benefit of keeping India open. And we will have to build capabilities not only at the edge of delivering services. I think we will have to build capabilities all the way up to the core ICTs. This is not an either-or question, because we already have sufficient traction. If you take, for example, IP and design, we already know that India, about 90% of the global IP and design companies work out of India. So we already have a lot of capabilities, but I think we would need to build on them. And that is also important because without that, without building domestic capabilities, I think there would be a lost opportunity in terms of developing new services, which a lot of the developing world needs. So in that sense, it's a loss to the global ecosystem. And secondly, it would also be a loss to 1 billion Indians. India is not a small country of 50 million people. It's a country of 1 billion people. So I think we will need to keep that sensibility in mind. The third thing is, I think India will have to work with international partners, because in the digital world, there are no borders. I don't think solutions developed in-house as silos with India walling itself off will work. So whether it is security, whether it is data protection, I think there is a real opportunity now, given that right from Silicon Valley, leading thinkers all over the globe are looking at how we can have a safer, better, more inclusive global internet and digital governance systems. I mean, this is something which every country is grappling with, and they all know that we have to collaborate. So I think we will have to look and work actively to evolve best practices. For example, even the father of the internet, Windsurf, he is already working on a new platform, Inrupt, where he has expressed extreme disappointment and concern with the way in which the current internet has evolved. So it's entirely possible that given the amount of energy and quality of thinking that is going into many of these issues, it is possible that there could be more humane, much better solutions that are going to come up in the future. And those solutions cannot be found by India alone, but we'll have to work with other partners. I'm going to end with the big questions that digital is throwing up, to which I think we have really, we don't have answers as yet. First of all, the jobs issue, and there are various estimates, the rate at which artificial intelligence is growing, the rate at which jobs are going to get, become completely irrelevant can vary, from 10% to a high of 70% or 69%. So that threat is very real. So is the answer to say that let's automate as fast as possible, let's relieve Indians of all humdrum routine activities, let's switch over and give them the universal basic income. As many of you know, the idea of universal basic income has gained a lot of traction because a lot of Silicon Valley leaders are actually pushing for it. They are saying, why should these jobs not go? These are not in any case great jobs that confer great human dignity and give lots of, they're not very creative and they don't lead to fulfillment. So why should not these not be abolished? Why should we not replace it with the universal basic income? But these are all, big questions, and I don't think any single country really has the answers. But I think sooner or later we are going to see every country kind of look at it very seriously. The other big question that is coming up is, the business models of the internet, and I think Rajat referred to that, this free internet where there's no distinction between various kinds of content, is that too much of a good thing? So instead, should we re-look at business models and say that, look, we will not use your data indiscriminately, but we will offer you various models where you can reveal or part with as much data as you like, or you can pay for certain kinds of data. So that is another paid versus free content on the internet. That's another debate which is raging everywhere. And of course, the most important one, security. And how do we ensure, given that digital data itself is being used both as a weapon of offense and defense, what kind of data security policies should we have? What kind of data infrastructural protections should we have? So this is another big area. Should we go for multi-networks, multi-vendor networks, or should we have much more stringent nationalized networks in place? This is again a debate which is raging. So I think the best I can do is to kind of share with you some of these questions and concerns. It's going to be important that we debate and discuss these issues in many fora. We must engage with these issues. We also need to be alive to what is happening internationally so that we can perhaps pick up best practices. while we grow the digital economy in India.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, for those very enriching words and leaving us with many questions to deliberate over this day. I thank the panelists and the opening remarks by both Dr. Kathuria and Mr. Cherukuri. Thank you once again, Madam Secretary. Now we'll break shortly to prepare for the next panel. Coffee and tea will be served. Please help yourself, and we should be back in about 5 minutes for the next panel. Thank you very much.